The night before my wedding, my mother came into my room and sat on the edge of my bed. I was 19 years old. I had sewn my own dress, pressed it twice, hung it on the back of the door where I could see it from the pillow. The lamp was low. The house was quiet. She sat there for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap, and I thought, this is it. This is the moment she tells me. This is when I finally learn what nobody has said out loud in all my 19 years. She reached over and smoothed a wrinkle from the quilt. She said, "Be a good wife." She stood up. She left. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the dress hanging in the shadows, and I understood that I was going into the most important night of my life knowing absolutely nothing. Not one word. Not one fact. Not one piece of information that would help me understand what was about to happen to my own body. I had been preparing for that wedding for months. I had canned vegetables and quilted and cleaned and organized and rehearsed every practical detail of what a wife does. I knew how to run a household. I knew how to start a fire in a wood stove before the sun came up. I knew how to preserve a season of food and mend a shirt and keep a kitchen so clean you could see yourself in the floor. Nobody had said one word about what a wife experiences inside her own marriage. There is a difference between those two things. A large difference. I did not know that yet. I was about to learn it in the hardest way available. What happened next is why I am here, talking to you now. What happened next is why I left. What happened next is something my community would have preferred I carry silently to my grave. Stay with me. What I am about to tell you about what Amish girls are never given before their wedding night is going to make you angry. And if you grew up anywhere close to the world I grew up in, it is going to feel uncomfortably familiar. My name is Martha. I grew up Old Order Amish in Wayne County, Ohio. I left several years ago, and this channel, Hannah the Amish Girl, is where I finally say the things my community would never allow me to say out loud. If you want to hear more truths like this one, please subscribe and tap the like button right now. And drop your city or country in the comments below. I read every single one. Now let me explain something, because you need to understand the world I was living in before you can understand what that night meant. In my community, the body was not something you discussed. Not with your mother, not with your sisters, not with any woman, any elder, anyone. The physical experience of marriage was surrounded by silence so complete, it had its own texture. You could feel it in every room, in every conversation that stopped a half-second too soon, in every word that was never spoken. And the silence was not accidental. It was theological. It was built into the structure of how we understood womanhood. A good Amish woman did not ask questions about her body. She did not speak about physical things. She submitted. She endured. She trusted that whatever came would be met with enough faith to survive it. Preparation was considered immodest. Information was considered dangerous. To prepare a bride physically for her wedding night would have required someone admitting out loud that the wedding night involved something physical, and that admission alone edged toward sin. The theology had a name for the impulse to seek comfort. It was called hochmut, pride, the greatest sin in the Amish understanding of the world. To ask for ease was to place yourself above your duty. To want information was to suggest that obedience alone was not enough. And so nobody asked, and nobody told, and generation after generation of women walked into the same night carrying the same nothing, and endured the same weeks, and called it faithfulness, because they had no other word for it. I had been promised to Samuel since February. He was 22, steady, a farmer who had built half his own house before the wedding. He was not unkind. He was not cruel. He was a man who had been given almost as little information as I had, because in my community the silence did not only fall on women, it fell on everyone. Samuel knew the rules. He knew how to work a farm and care for animals and build things that lasted. He did not know much else about what a marriage required in those first weeks. Neither did I, and in 4 weeks we were getting married, and neither of us knew enough to know what we did not know. My friend Ruth was married 2 years before me. She was 18 when she wed. After the wedding, I saw her at a quilting bee, maybe 6 weeks into her marriage, and I remember looking at her face and thinking something was wrong. Something behind her eyes was different, flatter, more careful. I did not know the word for what I was seeing. I know it now. I was seeing a woman who had spent 6 weeks enduring something painful every night, alone, in silence, because she believed pain was simply what marriage was, because no one had ever told her any different, because the solution, something so ordinary it sat in every Amish kitchen from Ohio to Lancaster County, had never been offered to her. She told me this later, years after we had both left. She said she had thought she was broken. She said she had prayed every morning for the strength to survive the next night. She said she would have been grateful for one sentence, one single sentence from her mother, her aunt, her bishop's wife, anyone. She never got it. Nobody gave it. That is not an accident. That is a system built on silence, sustained by silence, and causing real and unnecessary harm inside that silence. One marriage at a time, one woman at a time, each one believing she was the only one, each one enduring alone what all of them were enduring together. The wedding was on a Thursday. Amish weddings in my community only happened on Tuesdays and Thursdays, after the harvest was in. The ceremony was held at my parents' home, the furniture pushed to the walls, hard wooden benches carried in from the church wagon, rows of them filling every room. 4 hours. 4 hours of sermons in Pennsylvania Dutch, singing from the Ausbund, the ancient hymn book, the slow rhythmic lines that had not changed in centuries, the declaration before the bishop, the vows. Then the meal, for nearly 200 people. The women moving between the tables with platters of chicken and mashed potatoes and creamed celery, my mother among them, organizing everything, making sure every guest was fed. By the time Samuel and I were finally alone that night, I had been awake since 4 a.m. My feet ached through the soles of my new shoes. My shoulders were tight from holding myself straight all day. And under all of that exhaustion, underneath every layer of it, was a fear that had no name, because I had no information to attach a name to. I was not afraid of something I knew. I was afraid of something I did not know at all. That is a different kind of fear. It is the kind that cannot be reasoned with. It sits in the chest like a stone, heavy and shapeless, and no amount of prayer moves it, because you cannot pray specifically about something you have no words for. I had no words. I had been given none. And I lay in the dark that first night of my marriage, in pain I could not explain, with no framework for what I was feeling and no one I was permitted to ask. Here is what I wish someone had told me. Here is what would have taken 30 seconds to say and would have changed everything. The body needs time. The body needs ease. There are things that help and things that hurt, and none of them are mysteries, and none of them are shameful. And any woman who has lived inside a marriage for more than a few weeks already knows them. The information exists. It has always existed. It existed in my mother's kitchen, in the cabinet above the stove, in a small brown bottle I had cooked with my entire life. Olive oil. That is what I am talking about. Olive oil, or any simple natural oil, something every Amish home has in abundance, something that costs nothing and requires no explanation and sits in plain sight on every shelf. That is all it was. That is all it ever was. A practical, ordinary, available thing that nobody said a single word about to me or to Ruth, or to almost any woman I knew, because saying the word would have required acknowledging the reality, and acknowledging the reality was immodest, and modesty mattered more than our bodies did. I found out 3 weeks after my wedding. Not from my mother, not from Samuel, not from any elder or mentor or church figure. From Anna, a woman in her 50s who lived a quarter mile down the road and who had known my mother since before I was born. She came to my door one morning while Samuel was in the fields. She stood on the step and looked at me for a moment, in a way that I did not understand at the time. She did not ask how the marriage was going. She did not make small talk. She looked at my face the way an older woman looks at a younger one when she already knows the answer to a question she is not going to ask out loud. And then she said, without preamble, without introduction, as if she were simply continuing a conversation that had been happening between us for years. "Martha, oil is good for many things." That is all she said. She turned and walked back down the lane. I stood in the doorway holding the door frame, trying to understand. It took me 2 more days to understand. And when I finally did, I sat down on the floor of my kitchen, right there on the cold linoleum. And I did not move for a long time. The bottle was right there, above the stove. It had been above the stove since the morning I moved in. It had been there on my wedding day. It had been there every single morning of the 3 weeks that followed. I was not crying because I was relieved. I was crying because of the 3 weeks that had already happened. 3 weeks of waking every morning in the gray dark before dawn, pulling on my dress, starting the stove, feeding the animals, moving through the hours in a pain I had believed was simply what being a wife meant. 3 weeks of lying still at night, staring at the ceiling, telling myself this was faithfulness. This was submission. This was the shape of a good woman's life. It had not been any of those things. It had been a simple, practical problem with a simple, practical solution that had been sitting above my stove since the day I moved in. The solution had never been the mystery. The information had been the mystery, and the information had been withheld, not by accident, not by oversight, but by a system that had decided my silence was more important than my body. That had weighed my comfort against my compliance and chosen compliance every single time, every single generation. There is a part of this story I cannot tell you here. Not on this platform, not under these rules. The algorithm has limits, and I have learned exactly where they are. So I wrote the rest down instead, slowly, without the softening, without the cuts. Everything the camera is not permitted to show. The book is called The Ordnung They Never Wrote Down. 208 pages of what plain life looks like from the inside of it. The link is in the first comment of this video. That is where the part I could not say out loud lives. I want to tell you something about Samuel, because this part matters, and I have seen what happens when people hear this story and draw the wrong conclusions. Samuel was not cruel. Samuel was not selfish. Samuel was a 22-year-old man who had been raised inside the same silence I had, who had been given almost no more preparation than I had, who did not know I was in pain because I had been taught since birth that saying nothing was holiness. He did not know. When I finally told him, we were at the kitchen table after supper, the lamp between us, the clock ticking against the wall. I had rehearsed the words for days, and they still came out sideways. He looked at me, and something moved across his face that I had never seen there before. He said, "Why did you not tell me sooner?" I said, "Because I did not know I was allowed to." We sat in silence for a long time after that. The horses shifted in the barn. The lamp made small sounds. Between the two of us, at that table, was everything our families and our church and our entire community had failed to give either of us. And it had taken a neighbor walking down a lane, saying 7 words about oil, to begin undoing it. That conversation, 30 minutes at a kitchen table with a kerosene lamp between us, was the most honest exchange we had ever had. It should not have taken a stranger's whisper to make it possible. It should have been given to us. Before the wedding, before the vows, before the night that did not have to go the way it went. The Ordnung is the name for the unwritten code of rules that governs Amish life. Every community has its own version. It covers what you can own, what you can wear, how your buggy can look, what buttons are permitted and what are not. It covers almost everything. what it does not cover, what it has never covered, in any version I ever encountered, is what a woman's body needs inside her own marriage. That silence is also the Ordnung. It is the rule that goes unwritten because writing it would require acknowledging it. And acknowledging it would mean admitting that women have bodies that matter. Bodies with needs. Bodies that are worth a single sentence of preparation before the most physically significant night of their lives. The Ordnung that was never written down is sometimes the most powerful Ordnung of all. It does not need ink. It does not need a bishop reading it aloud. It only needs every woman in the community to stay quiet, and every generation to pass that quiet on to the next, until the silence feels like the natural order of things rather than a choice someone made long ago. My therapist, after I left, after the shunning began, after my mother's letters came back unopened, my therapist said something I have returned to almost every week since. She said, "The absence of information is also a form of control. It does not need a locked door. It does not need a rule written down somewhere. It only needs silence, maintained long enough, believed in deeply enough, that the women inside it do not think to ask what they are not being told." I thought about Ruth. I thought about every woman I had known, married at 18 or 19 or 20, walking into that first night knowing nothing, enduring weeks or months of unnecessary pain, and calling that pain holiness. The silence had a cost. The cost was paid entirely by us. Not by the bishops who maintained the silence, not by the theology that named our discomfort pride, by us, by our bodies, by the years of our lives. I left Wayne County in the spring, 3 years into my marriage. That is a longer story, one I have told in pieces on this channel, and will keep telling. The shunning was what I expected. The grief was not. The grief came in shapes I had no preparation for. The way loss of an entire world feels different from the loss of any single thing inside it. I mourned the community. I mourned the sound of the Ausbund on a Sunday morning. I mourned the way a quilting bee smells, the particular warmth of 20 women in a room working with their hands. I did not mourn the silence. I do not miss a single day of it. What I carry from that world, what I will always carry, is the texture of genuine community, the depth of belonging to something larger than yourself, the work ethic that has held me through every hard season since I left. These are real things. They mattered. They still matter to me. But I will say this plainly. There is no theology that requires a woman to suffer inside her own marriage bed. There is no scripture that makes her pain holy. There is no God I believe in now who designed a woman's body and then intended for the women around her to stand silent while she used it in pain and called that faith. The oil was above my stove the entire time. It was there the morning of my wedding. It was there during every one of those 3 weeks. And the fact that it came to me from a neighbor, sideways, in 7 words, at social risk, after all of it had already happened, that is the story. Not what the information was, who gave it, and who did not. There is something I want to say to the younger sister I never got to warn. To every girl who is right now sitting in a plain dress on a plain bed, counting down the weeks to her own Thursday. I did not know anyone like Anna until after I needed her. I did not have a single older woman who found a way to say the practical thing, the true thing, the thing that would have cost her almost nothing to say, and would have cost me 3 weeks not to hear. If you are watching this and you know someone who is about to be married, in any community that prizes silence over honesty, I am asking you to be Anna. You do not need to be brave. You do not need a long conversation. You do not need the right words or a private moment or any special permission. You only need to say enough, because the woman on the other side of that sentence will remember it for the rest of her life. I remember Anna's 7 words more clearly than I remember most of my wedding day. 7 words, spoken on a doorstep, walking away. That is all it took. That is all it ever needed to be. If you grew up in a world where your silence was called obedience, I see you. If no one prepared you, if no one named what your body might need, if you spent nights you should not have spent in pain you did not need to feel, I see you. Your body mattered then. It matters now. And if no one in your world ever said those words to you plainly, I am saying them now. If you want to read the version of this story that YouTube will not allow. The full pages are in The Ordnung They Never Wrote Down. First comment of this video, and that is everything. Choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life.